reverence is the word I'd want to use, but pleasure. So what I'm saying is, I believe you can recover sexual awe.
Welcome to the Care for Pastors podcast. We're glad you're here. Our vision is simple but powerful: to see pastoral families persevere in ministry, develop healthy churches, and lead in community transformation. This podcast exists to encourage you, challenge you, and provide practical resources along with real stories of hope to help you and your family thrive. Our heart is not just that you would survive ministry, but that you would prevail in your personal life, your family, and in your calling. So stay tuned for today's episode, hosted by Robby Bolden. Welcome to the Care for Pastors podcast. I'm your host, Robby Bolden, and today we're stepping into a conversation that is honest, vulnerable, and long overdue in the church. Our guest is Sam Jolman, author of the powerful book, The Sex Talk You Never Got. Sam is a counselor, a husband, and a father of 3 sons, and he brings both professional insight and personal conviction to a topic that many pastors struggle to address: sexual formation. In this first part of a 2-part conversation, we move beyond simply asking, am I behaving or not, and begin exploring a deeper question: what shaped my sexual story? Together, we'll talk about sexual brokenness, shame, abuse, pornography, and the silent struggle so many pastors and their spouses carry. This episode is not about condemnation. It's about curiosity, healing, and rediscovering the goodness of God's design. If you're a pastor, a ministry leader, or a spouse who has been isolated in this area, today's conversation will remind you that you're not alone and that shame does not get the final word. So let's begin part 1 of our conversation with Sam Jolman. Well, welcome to the Care for Pastors podcast, Sam. Glad you're here with us today.
Robby, it's so good to be here.
Everyone, this is Sam Jolman, and he is the author of an amazing book that we've been using here in our ministry called The Sex Talk You Never Got. Now, this is a very provocative title. It was really interesting. And what made you come up with that name there, Sam?
Well, I was aware of how little sexual formation most of us get, right? We talk about spiritual formation, right? And thankfully, we've brought value to spiritual formation among men and women. And but we don't often talk about sexual formation. And, there's consistently stories I heard from my counseling clients that they had gotten almost nothing. Right? Maybe a pamphlet handed to them or a book, right? Let me know if you have any questions, that sort of thing. And so left to believe that sexuality sort of just runs itself. And I think we all learn very quickly that sexuality doesn't just run itself, right? There's so much that shows up in our sexuality that we feel like we have to figure out on our own. And how to integrate it into our life, how to live it well. And I was also noticing, most men that came to me could only think about their sexuality in one primary way, which was, am I behaving or not? Right? Am I lusting or not lusting? Which is a good thing to be thinking about, right? That's a very good reflection to have in your life. But if that's the only way you think about your sexuality, you've left out all this other formation, right? Your whole sexual story remains unaddressed if you're only thinking about sexuality as a behavior, right? That you either do good or bad with. So I think those combined made me just feel this ache for men of how can we go deeper? How can we think about our sexuality the way God would want us to, right? Going back even to Eden, where God blessed Adam's sexuality. Like, this was meant to be a good thing.
Yes.
So what is that good? What was God's original intent within men? So all those set up, plus my own journey of, being a young man and having so much heartache and struggle in this area, as a newly married person, as a young man coming of age. So I wanted to provide kind of that fatherly conversation that most of us missed, now years after the fact, right? Where you've got more story and maybe more struggle to address.
Right. Yeah, I that's why I wanted to have you on, because I know you're in practice for yourself. You have a counseling practice there. Is it Colorado Springs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so you're married, you got 3 sons. And so you're in the thick of this, right?
Yes.
Personally.
Yes.
So,
I have 3 sons coming of age. So a 14-year-old right now. So yes, I'm firing with live ammo on these talks.
So you feel all of our pain out there who are listening to you today, right?
Yes, right.
Good.
You know, and I have compassion for all the parents that didn't know what to say.
Right.
Because we have generations of absent conversation here. We haven't known how to talk about this for a long time. So I get it. You know, as I'm looking at my son saying, how do we step into this? It's vulnerable, but it's worth the risk.
Right. And one of the reasons we wanted to have you on the podcast today is because a lot of our audience are pastors and their wives make up the bulk of this audience. And many of them come to us with a lot of sexual struggles because they really don't have anywhere to turn. You know, a pastor can't just stand up and say in a meeting, hey, I'm struggling here in this area, because they're leading a church, they're leading their family, and they're seen in the community, and we're supposed to have it together, but most of us don't. So I wanted us to have a real conversation today among 2 guys about how to address this issue in our own personal life and in the life of our family, and also how we can help our congregations with this whole issue of sexual health and sexuality in our own life. It is something that God gave us and created.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
So why don't you start out by telling us your story? What was the catalyst for this book?
Yeah, you know, there are certain ways. Let me step back. I want to address what you talked about, you know, with pastors addressing their own lives and their church community. You know, we have language that we use within the church, and we talk about sexual brokenness a lot, right? And unfortunately, what we usually mean when we say that is just sexual sin, right? That I'm broken, I'm damaged goods, and I'm a pervert. I'm a lust monger. I can't forsake this, right? There must be something deeply evil, twisted, dark, you know, broken in me that I can't quit my lust, my struggle with pornography, or other sexual brokenness habits. And I want to expand, you know, as I needed as a young man coming of age, right, in the church, where I saw my own struggles with pornography, I'm just so lustful. I must really, maybe I don't even know God, right? If I can't forsake sin, questioning deep things about my own life, or even, you know, I've talked to men who are terrified that, you know, within the hours after they've looked at pornography, or the days, that God's going to literally strike them dead, right? That car accident is about to happen. Like any moment, God is so furious with me, he's going to annihilate me. And I think we need to expand our definition of brokenness, as I needed as a young man when I entered into counseling, which is to understand you also have harm. You also have suffered things in your story of sexual growth and development. Most of that stuff gets buried. Most of that stuff gets shoved underground as just more of our own shame, right? But there, you know, even the absence of a conversation, even the absence of sexual formation, is a form of neglect in your life. But even things like, you know, I talk to men about their first experience of pornography. Most men's first experience of pornography is a story of sexual abuse. And I know that's a big statement, but most times, either I hear a story of a father, and this was in days of old, right? A father left out his pornography, right? And haphazardly left it out for a boy to discover. Or somebody introduced it to you, right? An older person, maybe even a babysitter or an older brother or somebody at your school, right? But somebody introduced it to you. That in itself takes away your capacity to consent. You don't know what's coming. So
Right.
even that, right? Even within that experience of your first exposure to pornography, a lot of times there's a story of abuse. So I want to invite us as the church to begin to be more curious than just, quickly labeling everything as lust.
Yep.
And
or condemning.
Yes, and again, let's name lust where it is for sure.
Right.
But then let's get curious. Right? I think of God when he meets Adam and Eve after they've sinned in the garden. He offers several things that are wildly kind right away, which are pursuit. Right? He goes to
Right.
find them.
Mhm.
Right? The
does.
second thing he does when he discovers them having sinned is he just asks a bunch of questions. Right? He doesn't go into a rage on them and say, "Oh my goodness, how could you screw this up?" Right? You're so terrible. No. He asks, "Who told you you were naked? Where are you?" Right? He's still pursuing them with kindness and curiosity. So I think, just a basic approach to our own sexuality needs to be beyond just behaving or not behaving, but to what's my story? What's shaped my sexuality? What am I acting out really here?
I think that's a really good place to start, because a lot of the clients that we experience, they come to us, they have a porn issue, maybe they've had an affair, but when we dig deeper, we find that there has been abuse in their life, that there was this introduction of, maybe, as you call it, a violation of introducing this pornography before. I mean, they're not prepared for that, correct?
Right.
And so it leads to a series of events, and many of our clients, some of them have been abused sexually as kids. And so we have a church and a society that says, look, these are just a bunch of perverts who are just out sinning, and they're creating havoc and mayhem in the church. But really, they're broken people who have been, they're just broken.
Right.
And they never wanted to be there.
Right.
But yet there's been a trajectory of their life that has led to this moment. And so, Sam, how do we approach this? Because we don't want to absolve people of their behavior, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we want to understand it so that we can get healing from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we talk about, right, like how do we address what are the problems, right, of sexuality in the church? And most times people think right away about, like pornography use, affairs, right, acting out sexual sin, or LGBTQ plus conversations, right? Like those are the big ones we need to address as a church. But the reality is, according to statistics, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 or 1 in 5 men have suffered sexual abuse, overt sexual abuse, meaning there was, by a kind of clinical definition, sexual contact that was made. Right. That is a staggering reality.
Yes.
If you look at 30% of your church community, 30% of the women have been sexually abused, according to statistics, right?
Right.
1 in 5, so 20% of the men. And again, I want you to hear that is almost guaranteed to be low, because sexual abuse victims rarely speak up.
Right.
Right? They're notoriously quiet and silent about their abuse. And another bit of research found that men are even more silent about their abuse than women.
Right.
Right? So again, I'm not saying that women are speaking up even all that much, because again, the strategy of evil with abuse is to leave you feeling like it's your fault, that it's your shame, right? That you somehow were complicit in your own harm. So again, what I want you to hear is there is a, a pandemic, shall we say that, of sexual harm in the world, but just in your community. If what you chose was to start to address, let's address the harm and the trauma that we've suffered outside of Eden, right? And I mean, that would be, so important, because that kind of stuff, I don't know, I've heard very few sermons on sexual abuse, addressing sexual trauma.
Right.
And I've heard many on sexual brokenness and sexual sin.
Yeah.
That's out of balance.
It is out of balance. And it leads me to this question. Why was sex the thing that Satan went after? Because it seems like he's hell-bent on destroying us sexually. When you look at our culture, almost everything that is broken is related to sex.
Yeah.
And so it's crazy how it is the primary position of brokenness in most people's lives.
Yes.
So can you kind of address that? Why he would go after such a thing?
Yes. Well, I think at some level, if we just look at even the basics of our anatomy, you have something like 8 to 10,000 nerve endings in your genitalia. That's true of both men and women. You have 3,000 to 4,000 nerve endings on your tongue, your taste buds. And I say those things to say God made you for pleasure.
Yes.
Right? Sexual pleasure, sensual pleasure, right? Taste, touch, sight, smell, right? The taste and see that the Lord is good, right? That's not just metaphor. It's not just sort of spiritually tasting him. I think he means literally, right? Take Eden, take this place that was made for you for a ride, right? Because why? And this is Eugene Peterson, because whenever you experience pleasure, and especially pleasure that leads to what's called awe, right? The wow, this is amazing, right? That you're going to want to look for the God, the person behind it, right? That awe is this kind of genesis of spiritual belief. To say, wow, right? I mean, think of a sunset, a beautiful sunset, right? Doesn't something in you want? Feel this craving for transcendence and like, I want to know who did this, right? There's got to be something bigger than me. Right. So I think, at some level, all pleasure, right? I'm not just talking about sexual pleasure, but including sexual pleasure, right? Is this, that there's something about our sexual self that mirrors the worshiper in us, right? The part of us that wants transcendence, wants to say thank you to a creator. So, I think right away, Satan knew, let me go after pleasure. Right? Let me go after their body's design. Because you're wired in Eden for pleasure. Let me go after that and get them to turn and misuse their own bodies, so that they don't go looking for God. Because if you genuinely are a sensual person, meaning you take in the pleasures of food, you genuinely live well with your sexuality, you take in one of the 7 sunrises and sunsets we're going to have in a week, you're going to be a worshiper. You're going to want to find God. So I think those things he was after.
So that leads me to this question: what was God trying to accomplish when he created sex?
Yeah, it's been pointed out, author Lori Krieg pointed out to me in one of her books, that, and I think this is from Tim Keller, that, the Bible begins and ends with a wedding. Right? And so there is something of union, transcendence, pleasure, love that are inherent, right, in our sexuality, and therefore mirror, God's ultimate consummation with us, right? That we're going to be one with Him forever. And so, that's a theological way of saying it. But I think, we have not done well in the church of blessing the body, right? We overly abuse Paul's words of crucifying the flesh. And we can confuse that we need to actually maim our body. And there's obviously examples of that in history, right? Of church fathers who have thrown themselves into thorn bushes, maybe even castrated themselves, right? In the name of I'm crucifying the flesh. I'm going to be sin free. And I think we've misunderstood, how the body is meant to be a witness. It's not just a place our soul is housed. It is us.
Right.
And so, I think God meant us for pleasure.
Yeah.
It meant us for other things too, but we think that there can be, love is this tough chosen thing, and at times love is chosen, and has to be, right? You have to suffer in love. We all know that. But there are also times you need regular moments of pleasure in all relationships of love, where you have delight, where you share laughter. I was just dropping my sons off at school this morning, and we were laughing to this funny Christmas song.
Right.
And I thought it felt so important to the grind of the morning.
Right.
And so I think God wants regular moments of pleasure with you.
Right. Right. No, I think that's you're right on there. And here's kind of what I'm thinking. As I was growing up in the church, I'm a pastor's son, and so I cannot remember many messages where the body or sexuality were praised and preached about in a God-honoring way.
Yeah.
Most of the time, it was seen as denial. Be careful. This is dangerous. We've almost made the creation that God made of sexuality into, I don't know. I like to kind of think that this is God's way of testing us to see if He could trip us up with this great gift that He's given us. But that's the wrong approach to look at it, isn't it?
Yes. Right. God's not trying to trick you. He didn't. Right. It's not like this. I know some people believe the thorn in Paul's flesh was his sexuality, right? And I don't know. I don't know what he was walking through, right? But to assume that all sexuality is the thorn,
right?
All pleasure is bad, and that but to be pious means to be stoic and devoid of any kind of pleasure. I agree. It's a false. I think it's a cursing, actually, of the artwork of God.
Right. Absolutely.
We overemphasize the doctrine of original sin rather than the doctrine of original goodness, meaning your body is a piece of art.
Right.
And yes, you're fallen. Yes, you need God. Yes, sin is in the way of our connection, our union with God. But it doesn't mean you're a worm. No. It doesn't mean your whole design is cursed and bad. We get that wrong.
I almost see it as we need to get back to the sanctification of sexuality rather than considering it a curse and something to be feared.
Yes.
Isn't that kind of what our whole walk with Christ is anyway, is a sanctification of who we are in Him and getting back to the creation?
Right, to be whole, right? Shalom, right, is wholeness. And so, to be made right is not just behaving well. Again, I think that's a trivialization of sin and brokenness, right? It's just good behavior? No. To be fully integrated. And to be able to, really live with the freedom of the beauty and pleasure God made for us in the world. I think you're spot on that.
Right. And so if I'm in the audience listening today and I've got this background of sexual brokenness, and you hear and I talking about, hey, it's part of creation. God wants it. He made it. It's His design. We need to be practicing it in His healthy way of doing that and design. And I'm sitting here with all this baggage and brokenness. Sam, how do I respond to what we just talked about?
Yeah.
What would you expect one of your clients to see, or what kind of perspective would you have them to have?
Man, I would want to start with, can you feel the burning in your heart? Right? Can you try to name what longing is stirring in you right now? Most men I sit with feel who have struggled with, pornography or an affair or some, fallout sexually for themselves. There's a sense of like, I've seen too much, I've done too much. Like, I don't know what's recoverable for me anymore. Right. And I am inviting you to the burning in your heart, right? That I believe you can recover your sexual innocence. We tend to think of innocence as naivete, right? Well, now I know too much. I've seen too much, right? Or being guilt-free, right? I'm free of guilt, right? Innocence is being free of guilt, right? But I'm too guilty. I know it, right? And I'm saying, no, I believe innocence. This is from Dana Ellender, a quote. He said once, innocence is the ability to be in awe. Innocence is the ability to be in awe. And I'm saying, I believe you can recover your sexual awe. Awe is this, what is awe, right? We say awesome in our culture, but awe is this, it's actually a studied emotion. And it's, the best definition I've heard is it's on the upper reaches of pleasure, on the edge of fear. And that might sound odd at first to have those two blended, but it's the feeling you get at the, the edge of the Grand Canyon, right? Or when you're, let's say at a concert or in some musical production, and you're just feeling moved by the power of the moment, right? Or you've seen a sunset or a sunrise or a waterfall, right? When you've experienced that kind of grandeur, that really gives you goosebumps, right? Or you read a story of somebody who's overcome something. That's awe, right? There's a sense, right, of if you're on the edge of the Grand Canyon, this is both exhilarating and a little terrifying.
Right.
This is what the Bible calls the fear of the Lord, right? It is the word awe, right? We talk about the fear of the Lord, and we all know it means something more than just being terrified of God, right? It's this sense of like being afraid, but also drawn to at the same time, right? It's every person who met God or an angel in the Bible, right? They instantly fall down. The fear part shows up, and the person says, it's okay. You don't need to be afraid. I bring good tidings of great joy, right? In other words, there's pleasure here. Yes, reverence is the word I'd want to use, but pleasure. So what I'm saying is, I believe you can recover sexual awe.
Now, so let me push back against that a little bit, okay? Because I know some in our audience, and again, I've talked to some of them where they were abused sexually as kids, women who have been abused and misused, and they're sitting there, Sam, incredulous, going, Sam, I don't know how that's possible.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that person?
Yes, and I would say at some level we need to address, the reality of what evil does in our stories, and even in our sin. with us, right? Most of the time when we are battling those struggles, it's not just the conviction of God, right? Or if there's trauma, it's not just the pain that makes us bury it, right? Evil really, really, really wants to join shame to your sexuality.
Yes.
As we've talked about, right? Evil hates your design as a sexual being because it mirrors your heart, right? Your lover heart mirrors your worshiper heart, right? We all know this from Song of Songs. It's why we always want to tease it into an allegory, right? Because it mirrors that. It mirrors our hearts as worshipers. And so I would say, you've got to address the presence of shame in your life. And most times when people say, there's no hope, I'm too far gone, it's too broken, I want to say that is the voice of shame.
Yes. What
the Bible calls the voice of accusation, right? And it is, as it was for Adam and Eve, the primary weapon of evil against our sexuality. Right? What did evil introduce through the temptation? Shame. Yeah. Right? And so quickly in the story of Adam and Eve, Satan attacked them with shame. So I would say, you've got to recognize that evil wants you to stay hopeless.
Yes. It
wants you to believe, sorry, you're too far gone. There's no way. And so some, response of anger would be appropriate here, right? That I hope you start to feel a little bit angry at that voice of accusation, that you'd start to turn the tables on that, because I think it is what evil would love you to believe, because then if he can get you in a loop of shame, you're going to just sin more, right? Sin leads to shame, leads to sin, leads to shame, leads to sin, and it's a spiral, because you stay silent, you develop secrets, and then you just feel worse and worse and worse, and it erodes you. And evil is cheering, saying, we've inoculated you, right? You've given up. This is great.
I heard you say this on another podcast, and I'd like for you to speak to it. What does shame rob God in our life? I heard you say that it robs the glory of God in our life.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah.
Because shame, everybody deals with shame.
Yeah.
And it's the enemy's playground, and we've got to quit playing on his playground.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, maybe let me start with, I'm going to work into my answer by saying, what is shame? Right? We talk about shame. What is it? Right? And to all of us, and it would be good for you to reflect as a listener, what is the biofeedback of shame in your life? What does it feel like to you? Right? What words would you use to describe it in your own life when it shows up? That would be helpful for you to know when it's there and not there. Just so you can recognize Satan's attack on you. But I would say, the best definition I've heard is from Dan Allender. He says, shame is the experience of exposure. Yeah. It is the terror of eyes, right? It's the opposite of feeling loved, right? Eyes, we talk about being loved as feeling seen. I felt so seen, right? And that can feel so loving when somebody sees you, right? They really get you. But the opposite can also be true, right? Of, oh my gosh, I wanted to die. I felt so mortified. I felt so exposed, right? If you think of an embarrassing moment, that's shame. There's a terror that something in you is being exposed and will end in utter rejection. That as soon as people see this about me, it's over. I will be utterly rejected, right? And so what do? Nobody can actually stay in shame very long, about a half a second. So what do? We run.
Yeah.
Right? Well, you can't really run from yourself, right? So what do? Well, we hide ourselves. We split. Literally, Adam and Eve hid, right? But we will choose to cut off parts of us, hide parts of us that we think are embarrassing or exposing. So we split. We bury ourselves. And, what I would want to honor here, you weren't meant to be a split person. You weren't meant to be a divided person. And so, most times people will bury parts of them that God made. And again, this is tricky, right? Because at some level we need to crucify the flesh.
Right.
So where does our sin nature end? Right? And our true self begin. That's hard to tease out at times. But, God, I don't believe shame is from God. I don't believe in the concept of healthy shame. I believe in conviction. I believe in guilt, right? 2 Corinthians 7, godly sorrow, right? Not worldly sorrow. I think Paul's trying to say shame and conviction, right? And he's saying, my first letter convicted you. I'm so glad. Yes. It didn't lead you to regret or worldly sorrow, which is that other shame sort of shutting down.
Yes. So
my point would just simply be, when shame strikes, people shut themselves down. When you shut yourself down, you are shutting down parts of you that God made. You may think you're just shutting down your sin nature, right? But if all you do is, just hide what you're doing and live in secrets and don't talk about it, there's a good chance you're gonna bury true parts of yourself, not just rid yourself of sin, and that's the glory of God in you. Mm-hmm. The incidence of self-hatred, right? So many clients I sit with, what they think is conviction, right, in crucifying the flesh, often looks like self-hatred.
Can you explain that? Can you go deeper there?
Yeah.
How do you know the difference?
Right. Good question. I would say at some level, physically there can be an act of adrenaline, paying attention to adrenaline. The other thing I'd want to name is the presence or absence of kindness. So first of all, I will say a lot of times people's self-hatred puts them in adrenaline. I've known people, a man once told me, I know when I hate myself because I usually do workouts that injure myself. I push myself too far on a run to the point that I get an injury. Or in the gym, I end up hurting myself. I'm not in tune to my body, right? So adrenaline.
Self-punishment.
Self-punishment, exactly.
Yeah.
I've known men that literally punch their own faces, right? And in the wake of pornography use, will literally say the worst things they can think of to themselves and punch their own face, right? I've known even sex addiction recovery groups where the men choose punishments for when they act out, right? Of what they're going to do to themselves to try to wire their brain different, right? And in my words, I would say that's so absent of God, because Romans 2, it's the kindness of God that leads us to repentance. God is slow to anger and rich in love. And so I would say, if your repentance does not involve kindness at some level, it's not of God. I know that's audacious to say, but God does not want, you're never going to hate yourself out of sin.
Right.
Hate your sin, right? But even Paul, right? Romans 7, he's wrestling.
Yeah.
The thing I don't want to do, I end up doing. He's wrestling with the flesh. Even he says, it's not me. It's the sin living in me. He's acknowledging there's a true self part of him that's good, created by God.
Right.
Right? Obviously redeemed by God. And so, hating yourself will not get you out. And so I would say if, I thought about that men's group, that sex addiction recovery group. And I wonder, I wonder if that group instead had said, when you act out, you need to choose a kind thing to do instead. Right? An actual act of self-care. Like rather than a cold shower, take a hot shower. Right? Rather than punching your own face, what if you took a nap? Or you called a friend? Right? Or you went on a walk. You gave yourself kind exercise.
Yeah.
I think we think that that's blessing the sin. You don't have to bless the sin. Somehow God knows that kindness will draw you back to him.
Yes.
So
it's grace.
It's grace. Yes.
Yes.
The scandal of grace.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. But that feels like such an easy way out, Sam. I mean, I've heard people say.
And here's what I'd say. There's a tension here. You can't just make light of what's happening.
Right.
And so, in other words, if what you say is, well, I screwed up, I'm going to go on with my day. And, I would say you're not really honoring your own dignity because, any kind of pornography use is not honoring to you. It right. is harming you. And so being able to have a deeper conversation, right? Inviting people in. If you isolate yourself, I would say you're inherently not being kind.
Right. It wasn't easy on Christ, right? It cost him his life, our sin. But he's paid the penalty already.
Yes.
And it doesn't need to be paid again. It just needs to be accessed.
Yes.
It needs to be received.
Yes.
Yes.
Right. In other words, I love your use of the word receive. Because I don't want you to mistake kindness for niceness. Right. I'm not asking you to go light.
Right.
I'm asking you to take risks. And the risk of moving towards relationship, which means not isolating anymore. Satan loves silence and secrets.
Yes.
Right? Silence and secrets. That's what he wants. If you just shut up about it and you just bury your secrets, great. He can cycle your shame and sin.
Right.
So I'm asking you to do the opposite of those. Tell the truth and tell the truth to somebody else. Move into relationship.
That's how you get out of shame.
Yes. Right. Right. You have to brave eyes. And I know we talked about, shame is the feeling of exposure. Mm-hmm. You have to risk on the kindness of God.
Right.
And it doesn't mean just say it in your head. That's good.
Mm-hmm.
It does mean I'm going to risk moving into relationship, right? God went after Adam and Eve. He brought them back into relationship. That's where you need to go.
That's where we have to go. And is there any benefit to bringing a trusted person into our life to help us walk out of that shame?
Yes. I mean, I would say it's almost essential to your life that you have somewhere you're talking about what's going on in you. That you seek a counselor, a mentor, a trusted friend, right? Somebody that will is brave enough to ask hard questions, but is also not gonna, beat you up, right? You don't need somebody that's gonna just be mean to you, but you do need somebody that's gonna call you out, but love you. At the same time, I would say it's essential. Again, shame isolates. Shame is dispelled through love. Yes. You have to enter love to dispel shame.
Yeah. So, Sam, I'm a pastor's wife, PK, sitting here, hearing what you have to say. I've been living in this shame, struggling to get out of it. And you say, hey, you need to come forward and talk to somebody. But, man, it's hard to find people to trust.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know you said, reach out to a counselor, reach out to a good friend, but there's really got to be a healthy, you mentioned earlier that isolation is huge in shame.
Mm-hmm.
God calls us into community.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of us don't live in a safe community as far as believers.
Mm-hmm.
What do we do, and who do we turn to when we feel like no one is safe, especially our spouse?
Mm-hmm. I would say at some level you have to risk.
Mm-hmm.
And if what you say is there's nobody that's safe, I'm going to question that right away. No one. Literally, you have no one in your life. 0 people who are safe. Right? I mean, what? Like, no one? No one. And again, I'm not saying you have 100, right? But my guess is, with God, you could move towards accessing resources. Maybe it's just one. And maybe it's a maybe. Maybe they'll be safe. Right? So I'm saying take that risk. And if you have no one, then go exploring. Right? Like if you're like, no, Sam, I literally don't have anyone. Okay, well then that's a major, crisis in your life. You need safe people.
Yes.
And so that needs to be a number one priority, that you're finding those people, accessing those resources, and again, I think a counselor, a professional, somebody that will hold it in confidence for you, right? If that's the terror, is I don't know what people will do to me. Okay. Right. Then find a professional place. Somebody who's trained to be safe. In other words, I would say, no one.
Yeah.
The whole world is evil. That's impossible.
But that's a lie the enemy tells us, right?
Oh, indeed. Because this is terrifying work.
It is. Yeah.
Right. I'm not just using cute language when I say it takes a lot of bravery.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Vulnerability is risky.
So, Sam, there's these spouses out there who need to, who are about to find out some information. Their husband, their child, maybe even them. There's some spouses that have heard what you've said today so far and said, you know what, I've got to talk to somebody, and I have got to talk to my wife or my husband.
Mm-hmm.
How would you prepare your spouse to talk to them about this? Mm-hmm. And if you're a spouse, how should I receive this information?
I think it's easy when you're holding secrets to want to barf them out.
Right.
Blah, I've been holding this all in and I just got to get it out. And so you just find your spouse and you just go there. You just say it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And, you feel better. rightfully so, because you've just broken silence. You've just been brave, a little bit more brave than you were 5 minutes ago, right? Because now you're starting to go towards the truth. And the difficulty is, now you've just, not really considered the state your spouse was in to receive that. Mm-hmm. And also, this is news that is now going to devastate them in their life. And so I would say, if you're planning a disclosure, I would get some counsel. And I would attempt to set up the kindest space you can. Meaning, I'm not going to do it right before they're going out the door. I'm not going to do it, right before they have a big meeting. I'm not going to text it to them while they're at work, right? You've got to consider the environment that they're receiving this news within. Mm-hmm. It's your best first act of kindness. This is going to hurt them. And the best thing you can do is set it up so that they're in a kind place, a safe place. Maybe that's with a counselor in an office so that counselor can provide care to them right away. Right. But that you're doing this in an environment, like not before a big event, not before, we've got 5 minutes and they have to go off to work, or the kids need to go to school or whatever. You've got to find a time when there's space for them and they don't have to be ushered into the next thing. And again, I will say there's never the best time. There's never a good time to do this. There's never the best time and it's going to be amazing. No, it will be hurtful. And so recognizing and being okay with their fallout. If what you demand is forgiveness right away, please forgive me, I'm so sorry. And again, saying you're sorry is good, but will you forgive me? That's such a heavy question right away.
Right.
They need time to sit with what's been disclosed. So letting them have the space to feel their feelings, to understand that's not necessarily a sign of an unforgiving heart, right? This is a wound. And so they may say, I forgive you, and I'm hurting deeply. They may not even be able to say the first part. They might just have to say, this hurts. I need time. And so then blessing them to get care, right? Understanding that if what you say is, please don't tell anyone, well, now you've asked them, to sit with enormous pain and stuff their own pain. You've got to make room for them to be able to access resources themselves. I think letting them know your hope. I want to reconcile. I want to heal. And I think as well, the other thing I'd say is, if what you do is give all the reasons that it happened. Well, this is the reasons and reasons and reasons, right? That may all be true. That all those things may have set you up to sin, but you've got to sit with, to them, the most hurtful thing is that somewhere in the mix you made a choice.
Yeah.
And you've got to sit with, that's going to hurt. They don't need all the reasons and reasons and reasons yet. They might ask what happened, but you've got to acknowledge, and at the end of the day, I made a choice.
Yep.
And it hurts you.
Yep. Well, Sam, I think that's a good place for us to stop today. We're going to continue this conversation on our next episode. And in our next episode, we're going to talk about how to reclaim sexual health. And so in that conversation, we're going to lay out a plan for recovery for you, your spouse, your family. And I really look forward to that conversation with you, Sam. Thank you for being here today.
Robby, thank you so much. This has been rich.
All right. Thank you. As we close out today's conversation with Sam Jolman, I hope you're walking away with something deeper than information. I hope you're walking away with hope. Today we talked about shame, sexual brokenness, abuse, secrecy, and the isolation so many pastors and spouses silently carry. But next week in part 2 of our conversation, we're going to move from diagnosis to direction. We're going to talk about how to reclaim sexual health, How do you begin rebuilding trust in a marriage after disclosure? And how do you move from secrecy to safety? How do you recover sexual innocence and awe after years of struggle? And what does a real practical pathway towards healing actually look like? We're going to lay out tangible steps toward restoring you, your spouse, and your family. Until then, remember, shame isolates, but grace invites. You don't have to walk this road alone. If this episode has been helpful, please like and review and share this podcast with a friend. We'll see you next week on the Care for Pastors podcast.